Either way, if you're on steroids, I think Dutasteride is the best bang for your buck and the safest bet from saving your prostate, your hair, and overall if you give a fuck about cosmetic appearance.
What's up, everyone? It's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. Please follow my Instagram at Russo Lifts, just in case something happens to this YouTube channel. You can follow, message, and you can watch my daily story content on Instagram. I'll see you there. What is up, everyone? It's Russo. I hope everyone is doing well. The King of Macedonia is back on YouTube. Alek Mitrevski at Alek Mitrevski on Instagram. I think we'll do a different video where me and Alek feud back and forth on the absence and get an update on Alek. Be sure to check out Blunt Biohacking, but I did want to shove out two topics for you guys. So the first topic we're going to be touching on in this specific video is going to be the introduction to hair loss. So Alek, I get tons of hair loss, questions. This isn't my expertise as far as the products I use. I just use that Ketoconazole shampoo from Intelligent Elephant, coupon code Russo if you want to use Derek's shampoo. I always get asked about Finasteride, Dutasteride, and then if that's going to impact libido, if that's going to impact, overall look, the drawbacks, the pros. I know you have spoken in the past about minoxidil not being very good on the heart and having side effects that aren't well documented. Why did you get into hair loss? I know you're the king of keeping your hairline, and where can you just let's just point out okay, I would start here. If you want to get more crazy with hair loss prevention, go here.
Right. So first of all, I started because I was starting to lose hair. I was, I think, 17 or 18. I was 2 cycles in basically from a steroid perspective, and I said, holy shit, I'm gonna be bald if I continue this. So that's one reason why I switched over to SARMs, from steroids to SARMs, and then back to steroids again. But as I was researching and I read everything related to androgenic alopecia, which is the actual name of what we're experiencing as males, which is male pattern baldness or androgenic alopecia. So it's in the fucking name. Androgens are the key mediators of progressive follicular miniaturization. So they're not the only one, and they're...
Go into miniaturization because people think you have so many hair follicles. Oh, what is miniaturization? Go through the cascading step that causes a hair follicle to permanently fall out.
So basically, your hair follicles are growing in the anagen phase, which lasts from 3 to 5 years on average. Now, as androgens start to attack the hair follicles and mediate these cascading effects through TGF-beta, WNT pathway, and downstream there's a whole cascade of events that are happening. That androgens are not the sole cause, but they're one of the upstream main mediators. And when that happens, basically your hair follicles shift. They prematurely go into the ketogenic phase, which is a resting phase, where the hair just stops growing. It just sits on your scalp, stops growing for 10 days, and then goes into the telogen or exogen phase, where you're basically shedding hair, you're losing hair. The telogen phase lasts for 90 days or so, plus the 10 days of the ketogen phase. When you lose a hair follicle like that, you're basically not gonna see it again for the next 3 months or so, maybe add 2 more weeks. So when that happens, when the hair cycle restarts, your hair follicle will be thinner in diameter. It's gonna grow lesser in length, so it's gonna prematurely eject from the scalp yet again. And that process will continue on and on and on until it's so thin and small, and basically you cannot even see it. It's called a vellus hair, and then it's gonna disappear. Now, it's not gone forever, even in this situation, but once fibrosis or scarring actually takes place, that's when it's fucking killed. So when does this happen? Nobody really knows. It can be 3 years after you've lost it, for some 6 years. But there are, absurd cases where people have regrown hair even 10 years after completely being bald through very intensive male to female transition with supplementing with estrogen, with anti-androgens, and other things. There have been cases where people have been struck by lightning and had regrowth of hair. Yeah. So that's basically interesting, but that tells you that localized inflammation can trigger stem cell response kind of like in a way where people are doing derma rolling, and the body will naturally respond, and it will deploy stem cell activation locally.
Is that why microneedling
Yes.
is so popular?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So that's one way. Now the lightning thing can be, can have other multiple.
I'm gonna go stand in the highest spot during a thunderstorm to regrow my hair.
Dude, this has happened several times in the literature. I've seen, anecdotal studies. I think 3 or 4, such as this one, but it's really interesting. So it goes to show that it's not just androgens, but they're like upstream of very strong mediator of hair loss, of androgenic alopecia. And one of the ways naturally that you can combat this is basically lowering overall androgenicity. So that's when 5-alpha reductase inhibitors are being deployed. So that's finasteride or dutasteride. Well, either or, because they have a huge difference. Finasteride inhibits like 73% of systemic DHT, and it also just works on 5-alpha reductase 1 and 3, whereas 2 and 3, whereas dutasteride inhibits all 3 5-alpha reductase enzymes 1, 2, and 3. The main difference is 5-alpha reductase 1 is located, a lot of it is located in our nervous system in the brain, and people that are prone to having depression or lack of androgenicity as far as like subjective feel may be more likely to induce to feel this with dutasteride rather than finasteride. But the interesting part is that when we're a 5-alpha reductase expression changes as we go through our phases in our life cycle. When we're like within our teenage years, 5-alpha reductase 1 is more expressed in hair follicles. So if you're a teen balding, then being on dutasteride will have a greater and better effect from a hair loss prevention standpoint. It's gonna have regardless because it's stronger, but without 5-alpha-1 inhibition in that aspect, you're gonna have still hair loss even with finasteride. Now, to what degree, it's very individual, but that's why there are non-responders to finasteride, where they just fucking start off losing hair when they're like in high school. And those people, those that have balls to do that, they hop on fin and they just don't respond as somebody that's 30 or 28 or something like that. They have an inferior response, and that's because when we're younger, 5-alpha-1 has a greater expression in the scalp. So either way, if you're on steroids, I think dutasteride is the best bang for your buck and the safest bet from saving your prostate, your hair, and overall if you give a fuck about cosmetic appearance. But what's interesting also, I'd like to note, when I was on test, I used dutasteride and my total and free testosterone were extremely elevated without me altering the dosage of testosterone. So at like 125 mg of pharmaceutical grade test, I had around I would say a 1,800 nanograms per deciliter, whereas without the dutasteride, I was hovering around 1,000 milligrams. Nanograms per deciliter, yeah. So it has, because you're blocking 5-alpha reductase, and I obviously have a greater expression, and I've lost so much test being converted into DHT, and when I block that pathway, essentially, that I was left over with more test. And gains wise, I had better muscle growth doing this. And there are studies where they compared brothers that are like identical twins. Identical twins. Yeah. One was on dutasteride, the other one wasn't. Not only the twin on dutasteride got to keep his hair for like 20 years more later on, muscle mass was greater than his twin. Now there can be so many things, like he may have taken something or whatever, or one may have been more meticulous with training, the other less, but going off of the conclusion of the studies, and it makes sense because testosterone is more anabolic than DHT in skeletal muscle. It's less androgenic, but it's more anabolic. So
yeah, but when you go, it's like the myth propagated online is like it impacts your look like negatively for muscle building. I guess it's like only muscle hardness look of the DHT being higher, which really you would only notice at an extreme low body fat anyway. So what you're saying is that the anabolic effect of having higher test would yield more muscle growth, just a little bit more puffy of a look.
Bro, let's be
I
real.
guess for me, what it impacts central nervous system stimulation as far as like strength output from lowering the obvious DHT levels.
Yes, that's true. But let me ask you this: when you're ripped, right? If you had let's say 5 milligrams of winstrol, for example, will you see a really statistical difference in your look? Not necessarily. You may or you may not. When you're fatter, you're not gonna see shit. So like when you're inhibiting the DHT, I think people greatly exaggerate the effects of hardening that DHT can provide within physiological ranges. It's different when you blast Masteron, winstrol, Anavar, higher doses. Like when you're super physiologically androgenic, that's different. But like when you're relying on your endogenous levels, I don't think there's a huge difference. Like go look at my pictures 2017 with the S4, right? Zero other androgens plus Dutasteride I've been taking Dutasteride since like 16 or 17. I was shredded out of my mind, didn't impact, my ability to lose fat, to hold on to muscle. Would I have more veins or something like that? I don't know, but like I think it doesn't even matter when you consider keeping your hair, having no acne, saving your prostate, because people that are prone to hair loss to a great degree and acne, usually they have a great expression of 5-alpha reductase in their prostate as well. So if you lose your fucking prostate, like that's not fun. Like you're never gonna have erections, you're gonna pee yourself in the pants. So like, is it worth it? Because like we're talking, oh my god. Point being, I don't risk reward ratio and what you're gaining and what you're sacrificing. I think it's worth it. Now I cannot make the call for everybody, obviously. A lot of people that are crying about post finasteride, post Dutasteride syndrome, whatever. With finasteride is really silly because
go into that syndrome for someone who's like just doesn't even know what that is.
Basically, they take finasteride, right? They take finasteride, they inhibit 5-FR 2 and 3, and then they stop for whatever reason. They don't feel well or whatever, and then the symptoms prolong. They don't go back to baseline, and they're like, oh, I'm fucked forever. That's physically impossible. The drug itself has a really short half-life. I'm talking about finasteride. I think within the 20 something hours it has a compounding effect, but when you go off, like within 3 weeks, 4, you should be 5-alpha reductase should not be inhibited. Now, as far as why people may have side effects afterwards, whenever you're messing with your hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, adrenal, gonad axis, you're shifting hormones from one side to another, and you're never guaranteed that everything's gonna go back to baseline. That's why you have to monitor, do blood work, and then reassess where you're lacking or what you have too much of. Usually people have more estrogen, and then when they go off, the ratio of androgens to estrogen is skewed. They may have like when they stop inhibiting 5-alpha reductase, they may have more estrogen conversion, and just like a paradoxal more estrogen conversion, and like they would have high estrogen symptoms, like they would have weaker erections, depression, some gyno, and they would like blame it still on the drug, but they never do baseline blood work. They never assess things. They speculate whether it's the allopregnanolone in the brain. Well, you can just take HCG, DHEA. There are things, progesterone. There are things that you can do to address that if that's the potential cause, but I doubt it. It's usually problems with estrogen. Another thing is some people have a greater tendency to have E1 estrogen being expressed, and estrogen gets, even though it's a weaker estrogen, it gets stored in tissues, and there's an enzyme called estrogen sulfate which converts estrogen E1 into estradiol within tissues themselves, and you cannot see that on blood work. And when that happens, they can have high estrogen symptoms even though their estradiol in serum is normal, and they're like, what the fuck is going on? And they may add a little bit of Masteron, which basically attenuates estrogen within tissues themselves, and then they feel better, and they're like, oh, I knew it, it's the lack of DHT, when in reality just estrogen being built up in tissues. And everybody has different enzymatic expression. There are genetic polymorphisms, so there are things that you can track and that they're harder to track, but if you know where to look for and what to look for, you have a high likelihood of finding it and basically reverting back the whole imbalance that you've caused with this type of drugs. And keep in mind, these are very, very, very rare cases. When people know about them and read about them,
we're nitpicking.
Yeah. There are a lot of studies showcasing that side effect expression this goes for a lot of things. It increases by 30% when the patient is aware of the potential side effects versus not. So the fucking placebo effect is extremely real. So that's
as far as the other critique I'll read online is, well, first off, I think you covered the bases of like, if you're looking for a DHT androgen look, like if you're blasting Winstrol, a little bit of Dutasteride is not going to stop the crazy amount of DHT. So like in a normal amount, it's leaning towards actually building more muscle technically because you have higher levels of testosterone because you're stopping the conversion. My other critique is the libido issue that is propagated online that's saying that the erections get weaker per se from the lower levels of DHT in the body.
Yeah, but you have higher testosterone to compensate. Testosterone is an androgen. It's an androgen. You may have, like I personally experienced acutely, like some ball pain, kind of like when you start steroids, and slightly watery semen. Again, similar to when you start a cycle, especially if you're a newbie. But that just goes back to normal within 3 weeks or so. So yeah, acutely anything can happen, but the body thrives towards reaching homeostasis. It's what it does. It checks and balances, and it tries to get back and work the most efficient and optimal as it can. So especially if you use exogenous androgens, then what are we talking about? You're still gonna have more androgens in your system versus a natural guy with natural test and DHT. If you're somebody that's blasting tests, SARMs, what else, like EQ, nandrolones, tren, whatever, so like you're blasting steroids, you think that blocking endogenous DHT is gonna make a difference as far as how you feel, perform? No. Like even take Olympians, take Ian Valère. He was on finasteride his whole career, recently stopped it because he believed he would get additional graininess, which I think it's stupid. Now he has a greater bald spot at the back of his head. He moved one place at the Olympia, or I think he's 7th, so no changes, no net changes. I don't see any difference. I asked him on a Q&A. He believes he has some slightly better look that can be attributed to a variety of things. But as it is, like if you look at when Greg prepped him when he was younger, he was shredded out of his mind, looked amazing, used finasteride. So here you go. And there are a lot of pros that also take this. So Dave Palumbo also has been taking that, even though I don't prefer his look. He was always shredded, grainy, whatever. So, I mean, take it for what it is. Logically thinking, I think risk-reward ratio, I think it's warranted to just give it a try, if not anything.
My final thing is, like, obviously with these hair loss drugs, right? Prevention, mitigation before it happens. Like, as far as someone, you know, late to the party and they start implementing all the knowledge you just spit, can they expect hair regrowth, or is it kind of like maintaining what you got left? Like, give a realistic take. I mean, you started like what, 16, so you were always like hyper aware, hyper researched, where most guys in the West, at least, you know, they go all the way throughout their life, oh, what's happening to my hair, you know, they try all the gimmicks online. They don't really read into the actual, you know, 5-alpha reductase inhibiting DHT, learning the hair cycle. Like, everything learned in this video is not common knowledge. So if someone's jumping in late to the party, what can they expect? And when should you get on the finasteride, dutasteride train, in your opinion?
If you're that scared, you can also address it via a topical route. So there's topical finasteride that does seem in studies to have a greater scalp inhibition of DHT and lesser systemic effect. So I think that's worthwhile trying. Topical dutasteride isn't worth trying. Its molecular mass is higher than 500 daltons, which means that it doesn't penetrate the skin. If it does with things like DMCO or different, you know, drugs that basically would increase systemic increase absorption through the skin, that's gonna still have systemic effects. And since dutasteride is so strong, it's still gonna have an insane systemic DHT inhibition effect. So if you go the dutasteride route, just say fuck it and take it orally. As far as what other things people may also use, there are topical anti-androgens like RU558 0841. There's CB0301. There's another one that just they discovered a year ago. I think Anagenic will have it, or maybe they even have it right now. But keep in mind that when you're using research chemicals that are owned by one or two companies, they're not patented, but they have like the 90% of the market, or if not more. You have no quality control. You have no idea whether these drugs have a systemic effect. Like having a very strong systemic anti-androgen in your body can block androgen receptors in your brain, in your heart. So I think it's riskier to go the topical anti-androgenic route, unless you're talking something like ketoconazole shampoo that you're using, or topical spironolactone cream, or which I think is very weak. But in general, there's this potential, risk that people should be aware of. As far as what people can expect, it's very individual. I've seen people regrow 35. Look at Wesley Vissers. He was bald as fuck up until a year and a half ago. He was like severely diffuse thinning throughout his whole scalp. Now his hair is like pretty thick. He, as far as I know, he's on minoxidil with derma rolling. I don't know whether he's on a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor or not. I assume he is. So while he's taking steroids, obviously, and continuing bodybuilding, so you can have realistic regrowth, and there's never a point where it's like super like very late, unless you're past Norwood 5 or something like that. You never know. Individual drug response can vary greatly, and you may be a hyper responder, in which case you would be stupid not to give it a shot. So the earlier you catch it, the better, obviously, especially with this. I would say if you're starting any form of enhancement with exogenous androgens, I would address this issue. I would be proactive, not just from a hair loss perspective, skin, prostate, and so forth. I think that's pretty smart. Also, you can implement S4. I've had the most amazing regrowth when I had S4 into my stack, because it's a partial agonist of the androgen receptor, and it has a higher affinity for scalp, basically for overall androgen receptors, but mostly in scalp and prostate. And since it's a partial agonist of the androgen receptor, it mediates a very weak transcription from an androgenic aspect. So that's the only SARM where I've seen studies that no matter the dose increase, its androgenicity never managed to increase prostate size above baseline. So even like super high doses where they fucking overdose rats, the prostate was never super physiologically big. And I've tried every possible dose. I even ate Ross straight up, like with a spoon. Tried injectable as well. So none of that had any negative effect on my hair. So I do believe it may have a potential benefit using it even as a topical, because I'm pretty sure it has a pretty light molecular weight. So that's also something that can be implemented. Derma rolling 2-3 times per week. Oral castor oil has also been shown to increase PGE2, which is a hair growth prostaglandin. It has different effects in the body, but from a hair perspective, it tends to potentiate hair growth. It's interesting though that there's an immune suppressive drug called cyclosporin, which is shown to cause hypertrichosis via modulating a separate pathway, which now they basically try to make a drug off of that's not going to have the immunosuppressive effect, just to target that downstream pathway. So we'll see what that happens. This year there are a few trials with that, so there are things in the works which may help a lot. So far we're stuck with the basic fundamentals and principles, and that's the best that we have. So we can I would rather throw the kitchen sink at it, especially if I'm abusing drugs. But people need to think, to read everything, and to make their own informative decisions.
Right. 100%.
So that's around and obviously when choosing steroids, you don't want to use high androgenic, rather higher, more anabolic drugs, and then save the androgens for prep or for any periods where one requires a certain look, like super hard, super vascular, that stone granite look. Outside of that, steroids are made to build muscle. They're anabolic agents. They're not fat loss drugs. They're not, look at, my Serratus drugs. Like, that's diet, that's cardio. So use them as such, use them as muscle builders, gain fucking muscle mass, and then just diet and see what you have underneath.
Awesome. Well, if you guys found this informative, please like the video. And if you would like to get a 1v1 consultation with Alek, I will put it in the description below, as well as his coaching website. I will see you guys in my next video.